I am Daniel, a servant of the one true God. My story is one of faith, courage, and divine intervention. From the lion's den to the courts of foreign kings, my life has been a testament to God's power and faithfulness. This is my story.
Once upon a time, in the ancient kingdom of Babylon, there lived a young man named Daniel. Daniel was a member of the royal family of Judah, but he was taken captive when Babylon conquered Jerusalem. In Babylon, Daniel and other young men from noble families were chosen to serve in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. The king ordered that they be trained in the language and literature of the Babylonians, so they could serve as advisors and administrators in his kingdom. Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were among those chosen for this training. But Daniel faced a dilemma. The king's food and wine were not in accordance with the dietary laws of his faith, so he asked the chief official for permission to eat only vegetables and drink water.
Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see.
The official was hesitant, fearing that Daniel would appear weak and malnourished compared to the other young men. But Daniel convinced him to allow him and his friends to follow this diet for 10 days to see if they would be healthy and strong. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his friends appeared healthier and better nourished than the others who had eaten the king's food. As a result, the chief official allowed them to continue with their diet. God blessed Daniel and his friends with knowledge and understanding far beyond that of the others in the court. They excelled in their studies and were found to be 10 times wiser than all the magicians and enchanters in Babylon. One day, King Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by a dream that left him deeply disturbed, but he could not remember the details of the dream or its meaning. In his desperation, the king summoned his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, demanding that they not only interpret the dream, but also tell him what the dream was.
This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me.
They protested, saying that no one could do such a thing except the gods, and they did not live among mortals.
There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans.
The king, in his fury, ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed, including Daniel and his friends, who were among them. When Daniel learned of the decree, he asked the king for time so that he could interpret the dream. That night, Daniel and his friends prayed fervently to God for mercy and revelation. In a vision, God revealed to Daniel both the dream and its meaning. The next day, Daniel went before the king and told him that no human could reveal the dream, but that there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Daniel then recounted the dream to the king.
Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth.
Daniel explained to the king that the statue represented 4 great empires that would rise and fall. The head of gold symbolized Nebuchadnezzar's own kingdom, followed by lesser kingdoms represented by silver, bronze, and iron. The rock that destroyed the statue symbolized the kingdom of God, which would endure forever. Upon hearing this interpretation, King Nebuchadnezzar was filled with awe and reverence for Daniel's God. He acknowledged the God of Israel as the true God, the revealer of mysteries, and he rewarded Daniel with great honor and authority in the kingdom. Sometime later, King Nebuchadnezzar decided to build a golden statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon and summoned all his officials to the dedication ceremony. At the ceremony, a herald proclaimed that when the music played, everyone was to fall down and worship the golden statue. Anyone who refused would be thrown into a blazing furnace. Among those present were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 Jewish men who served in the king's court. When the music played, everyone around them bowed down and worshiped the golden statue. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remained standing, refusing to worship any god except their own. Enraged, some of the king's officials accused the 3 men of disobeying the king's command. They were brought before the king, who gave them a chance to bow down and worship the statue. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood firm in their faith, declaring to the king,
"If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up."
Infuriated by their defiance, King Nebuchadnezzar ordered the furnace to be heated, 7 times hotter than usual. The 3 men were bound and thrown into the fiery furnace. But, to the amazement of all who watched, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not harmed by the fire. In fact, they were walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And there was a 4th figure in the furnace with them, who looked like a son of the gods. Seeing this miracle, King Nebuchadnezzar called the 3 men out of the furnace. They emerged unscathed, without even the smell of smoke on them. The king praised the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, declaring that no other god could save in this way. King Nebuchadnezzar had another troubling dream. In his dream, he saw a great tree at the center of the earth, reaching to the heavens, visible to the ends of the earth, providing food and shelter for all creatures. An angel descended from heaven and ordered that the tree be cut down, leaving only a stump with its roots bound in iron and bronze. The angel declared that the king would be driven away from human society and live with the wild animals, eating grass like cattle, until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. When Daniel heard about the king's dream, he was troubled and hesitant to interpret it. But the king urged him to do so, and Daniel explained that the tree represented the king himself. He warned the king that unless he humbled himself and acknowledged God's sovereignty, he would be driven from his throne and live among the animals. 12 months passed, and the king's pride and arrogance remained. As the king walked on the roof of his palace, he boasted about his great achievements and the splendor of his kingdom. Immediately, a voice from heaven declared,
"This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes."
True to the dream's prediction, King Nebuchadnezzar was driven from his throne and lived among the wild animals, eating grass like cattle. His hair grew long and his nails became like claws. After 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar's sanity was restored, and he praised and worshipped the God of heaven. He acknowledged that God is the true ruler of the earth, and he was restored to his throne, even greater than before. Years passed, and King Nebuchadnezzar's successor, King Belshazzar, hosted a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles. As they feasted, Belshazzar commanded that the gold and silver vessels taken from the temple in Jerusalem be brought so that he and his guests could drink from them. and praise their gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. As they drank from the sacred vessels and praised their idols, a mysterious hand appeared and wrote on the wall of the king's palace. The king was terrified, and his face turned pale with fear. He called for his enchanters, astrologers, and diviners to interpret the writing, but none could understand its meaning. The queen remembered Daniel, the Jewish exile who had interpreted dreams for King Nebuchadnezzar. She told the king about Daniel and his gift of interpreting dreams and visions. Daniel was brought before the king, who promised him great rewards if he could interpret the writing on the wall. But Daniel refused the rewards and told the king that no amount of wealth could buy the interpretation he would give. Daniel explained that the writing on the wall was a message from God, proclaiming the downfall of King Belshazzar's kingdom. The words Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin meant that God had numbered Belshazzar's days and brought an end to his kingdom, which had been weighed and found wanting, and would be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, Belshazzar was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Daniel's interpretation had come true, and once again the power and sovereignty of God were revealed to all. King Darius appointed 120 satraps to rule over his kingdom, with 3 administrators overseeing them, one of whom was Daniel. Daniel distinguished himself among the administrators and satraps because of his exceptional qualities, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Jealous of Daniel's favor with the king, the other administrators and satraps sought to find grounds for charges against him, but they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, and neither corrupt nor negligent. The administrators and satraps devised a plan to trap Daniel concerning his faith in God. They convinced King Darius to issue a decree that for 30 days, anyone who prayed to any god or man other than the king would be thrown into the lion's den. Despite the decree, Daniel continued to pray to his God 3 times a day, as he had always done. When the administrators and satraps saw Daniel praying, they went to the king and reminded him of the decree. Despite his fondness for Daniel, the king was bound by his own decree and had Daniel thrown into the lion's den. That night, King Darius could not sleep. Early the next morning, he hurried to the lion's den and called out to Daniel. To his relief and amazement, Daniel answered,
"May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty."
Overjoyed, King Darius ordered that Daniel be lifted out of the den. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. He then issued a new decree, declaring that the God of Daniel was the living God who rescues and saves. And he commanded that everyone in his kingdom fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Daniel's faithfulness to God had saved him from the lion's den, and his integrity and trust in God had been a powerful testimony to King Darius and all the people of Babylon. Overall, the story of Daniel serves as an inspiring example of faith, courage, and obedience in the face of trials. It encourages us to trust in God's providence, stand firm in our convictions, and remain faithful to Him in all circumstances. Many years ago in the land of Israel, there lived a man named Manoah and his wife, who was barren and had not been able to conceive a child. Despite their longing for a child, they remained faithful to God and prayed earnestly for His blessing. One day, an angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife, saying,
"You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines."
Overwhelmed by this divine visitation, Manoah's wife ran to tell her husband the news. Manoah prayed to God, asking for guidance and seeking confirmation of the angel's words. In response, God sent the angel once again to visit Manoah and his wife. When the angel appeared, Manoah asked, "When your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work?" The angel replied,
Your wife must do all that I have told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor drink any wine or other fermented drink, nor eat anything unclean. She must do everything I have commanded her.
Manoah then asked the angel to stay while they prepared a young goat as a sacrifice to God. As the flames from the sacrifice ascended to heaven, the angel ascended in the fire, confirming the divine nature of the visitation. Filled with awe and reverence, Manoah and his wife praised God for his goodness and mercy. They named their son Samson, meaning like the sun, and raised him according to the angel's instructions, dedicating him to God from birth. Samson rose to prominence in Israel, known for his incredible strength and unique Nazirite vow. Samson, guided by the Spirit of the Lord, sought to challenge the Philistine oppressors who ruled over Israel. One day, Samson traveled to the Philistine town of Timnah, where he encountered a young lion. In a display of his extraordinary strength, Samson tore the lion apart with his bare hands, a feat that astounded all who witnessed it. Sometime later, as Samson returned to Timnah for his wedding, he passed by the carcass of the lion and found that bees had created a hive inside it, producing honey. Samson, without revealing the source of the honey, shared it with his family, demonstrating his bold and unconventional nature. At his wedding feast, Samson posed a riddle to the Philistine guests, challenging them to solve it within 7 days. The riddle, out of the eater, something to eat, out of the strong, something sweet, puzzled the Philistines, who could not discern its meaning. Desperate for an answer, the Philistine guests pressured Samson's wife to discover the riddle's solution. She pleaded with Samson until he relented and revealed the answer to her. She, in turn, shared it with the Philistines, betraying Samson's trust. On the 7th day, as the Philistines confidently answered the riddle, Samson realized that they had learned the answer through deceit. Consumed with anger, he left the feast and traveled to Ashkelon, where he took the lives of 30 men and took their garments to fulfill his promise of a prize. This incident marked the beginning of Samson's conflict with the Philistines, foreshadowing the struggles and battles that would define his life. At another time, Samson visited his wife, but his hopes were dashed when he realized that she had been given to another man. In a bold act of revenge, Samson captured 300 foxes, tied them together in pairs, and set their tails ablaze, unleashing them into the Philistine fields, which were soon engulfed in flames. The Philistines, in their fury, retaliated by taking the lives of Samson's wife and her father. Consumed by grief and rage, Samson waged a one-man war against the Philistines, striking them down with unmatched ferocity. Seeking refuge in a cave at the rock of Etam, Samson found himself surrounded by Philistine soldiers. The men of Judah, fearing the Philistines' reprisal, urged Samson to surrender. Reluctantly, Samson agreed, but only if they promised not to harm him. As the Philistines closed in, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, filling him with renewed strength. With nothing but the jawbone of a donkey in his hand, Samson fought back, single-handedly defeating 1,000 Philistine soldiers in a stunning display of courage and might. After the battle, exhausted and parched, Samson cried out to the Lord for relief. In a miraculous answer to his prayer, water gushed forth from a hollow place in the ground, refreshing Samson's weary body and soul. One day, Samson went to the city of Gaza, a stronghold of the Philistines, and spent the night there. When the people of Gaza learned that Samson was in their city, they surrounded it, intending to capture him at dawn. But Samson was not one to be easily captured. In the middle of the night, he got up and went to the city gates, where he found them securely fastened. Undeterred, Samson tore the city gates from their hinges, bars and all, and carried them to the top of a hill facing Hebron, a city of the Israelites. It was a remarkable display of strength and defiance, showing the Philistines that even in their own stronghold, Samson was a force to be reckoned with. Time passed, and he fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. The rulers of the Philistines saw an opportunity to capture Samson and approached Delilah with a tempting offer, a large sum of money in exchange for discovering the secret of Samson's strength. Delilah, enticed by the promise of wealth, repeatedly asked Samson to reveal the source of his strength.
"Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued,"
she said. 3 times he deceived her, telling her that his strength would be weakened if he were bound with fresh bowstrings, new ropes, or if his hair were woven into a loom. Each time, Delilah tested his words, only to find herself deceived. Finally, Delilah said,
"How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength."
With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." While Samson slept, Delilah betrayed him, cutting his hair and robbing him of his strength. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and brought him to Gaza, where he was bound in bronze shackles and forced to grind grain in the prison. Despite his downfall, Samson's hair began to grow back, a sign of God's mercy and restoration. One day, the Philistine leaders gathered in a great temple to celebrate their victory over Samson. They brought him out to entertain them, unaware that his strength had returned. Samson, leaning against the temple's pillars, prayed to God for strength one last time. With a mighty effort, he pushed against the pillars, saying, "Let me die with the Philistines." The temple collapsed, killing himself and all the Philistines inside, including the rulers. Thus, Samson's life ended in a final act of strength and redemption, as he sacrificed himself to deliver Israel from the oppression of the Philistines. Though flawed and fallen, Samson's story reminds us of the power of repentance, redemption, and God's unwavering faithfulness to his people. In ancient Israel, King David, the beloved and legendary ruler, was nearing the end of his reign. Despite his many triumphs and victories, David knew that his time as king was coming to a close. As he reflected on his legacy and the future of his kingdom, he faced a crucial decision, choosing his successor. Among his many sons, one stood out: Solomon, his son with Bathsheba. David, guided by both his love for Solomon and his belief in God's will, made the momentous decision to anoint Solomon as his successor. With the support of key figures in the kingdom, including the prophet Nathan, Solomon was officially declared the new king of Israel. Solomon's anointing as king was not just the passing of a crown from father to son. It was the continuation of a legacy, a testament to the enduring strength and wisdom of the Israelite kingdom. As Solomon ascended to the throne, he carried with him the hopes and dreams of his people, ready to lead them into a new era of greatness. In the early days of his reign, King Solomon traveled to Gibeon, where the tabernacle of the Lord was located. There, he offered sacrifices to God, seeking his guidance and wisdom to rule the kingdom justly and wisely. As night fell, Solomon lay down to sleep, and God appeared to him in a dream, saying,
Ask for whatever you want me to give you.
Filled with humility and a deep sense of responsibility, Solomon replied, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. So give your servant wisdom to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern these great people of yours?" God, pleased with Solomon's request, said to him,
"Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be."
Solomon awoke from his dream, and he knew that God had granted his request. He returned to Jerusalem, where his reign as king began in earnest. Solomon's wisdom became renowned throughout the land, and people from all corners of the earth came to seek his counsel and hear his judgments. God's favor upon Solomon was not limited to wisdom alone. He also bestowed upon him riches and honor, making him one of the wealthiest and most respected rulers of his time. Solomon's reign was marked by prosperity and peace, and his wisdom was a guiding light for the people of Israel. One day, two women came before King Solomon, each claiming to be the mother of a newborn baby. The women lived together in the same house and had given birth to their babies within days of each other. However, during the night, one of the women's babies died, and she switched her dead baby with the other woman's living child. Both women were adamant that the living child was theirs, and they begged Solomon to resolve the dispute. After hearing their arguments, Solomon devised a clever plan to uncover the truth. He called for a sword and declared, "Bring me a sword, divide the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other." The first woman exclaimed,
"Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him."
But the other woman said,
"Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two."
Solomon immediately knew who the true mother was. He said, "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." The people marveled at Solomon's wisdom and discernment, realizing that God had given him exceptional understanding to administer justice. News of this judgment spread throughout the kingdom, and Solomon's reputation for wisdom grew even greater. After consolidating his reign and establishing peace throughout the land, King Solomon turned his attention to a grand and ambitious project: the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. This magnificent structure would become the centerpiece of Israelite worship and a symbol of God's presence among his people. Solomon spared no expense in planning and building the temple. He enlisted the help of Hiram, king of Tyre, a skilled craftsman renowned for his expertise in bronze work. Hiram sent his master craftsman, also named Hiram, to work alongside Solomon's artisans and builders. The construction of the temple was a massive undertaking, requiring the quarrying and shaping of large stones for the foundation and walls. Skilled craftsmen carved intricate designs and patterns into the stones, while others worked on the elaborate decorations and furnishings for the interior. Hiram of Tyre was particularly instrumental in the casting of the bronze pillars that adorned the entrance to the temple. These pillars, named Yachin and Boaz, were adorned with decorative capitals and stood as symbols of strength and stability. The interior of the temple was equally impressive, with the Holy of Holies containing the Ark of the Covenant, the symbolic throne of God on earth. The walls were overlaid with gold, and the floors were paved with intricately patterned tiles. The construction of the temple took 7 years to complete, and when it was finished, Solomon dedicated it to the Lord with a great ceremony. The temple became the focal point of Israelite worship, where the priests offered sacrifices, and the people gathered to seek God's presence. In the land of Sheba, there ruled a queen known for her beauty, wealth, and wisdom. Her name was Makeda, but she is famously known as the Queen of Sheba. She had heard of the great wisdom of King Solomon of Israel, and she resolved to visit him to test his wisdom for herself. Accompanied by a magnificent retinue of servants and bearing gifts of spices, gold, and precious stones, the Queen of Sheba embarked on a long and arduous journey to Jerusalem. When she arrived, she was awestruck by the splendor of Solomon's kingdom and the magnificence of his court. She was welcomed with great honor and respect by Solomon, who graciously invited her to stay and partake in the bounty of his kingdom. The queen was impressed by the wisdom and knowledge that Solomon displayed in answering her questions and solving her riddles. As the days passed, the Queen of Sheba observed the orderly governance of Solomon's kingdom, the justice of his judgments, and the harmony among his people. She saw the grandeur of the temple he had built and the wisdom of his advisors. She was deeply impressed by all she saw and heard. Finally, the queen could contain her admiration no longer. She exclaimed,
"The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard."
The Queen of Sheba praised the God of Israel for blessing Solomon with such wisdom and prosperity. She acknowledged Solomon's greatness and the greatness of his kingdom, declaring that the wisdom and prosperity of Solomon's reign were a reflection of God's favor upon him and his people. Before she departed for Sheba, Solomon presented the queen with gifts of equal magnificence to those she had brought, a gesture of respect and goodwill between their two kingdoms. The Queen of Sheba returned to her own land, her heart filled with admiration for Solomon and his God. As Solomon's reign continued, his wealth and power grew exponentially. His kingdom became known far and wide for its prosperity and splendor. Solomon accumulated vast amounts of gold and silver, and his trading ventures brought him riches beyond measure. Along with his wealth, Solomon also acquired a great number of horses, chariots, and other symbols of military might. He built up a formidable army, ensuring the security of his kingdom and expanding its borders. Despite his early devotion to God and his wisdom in governing the kingdom, Solomon began to stray from God's commands. He took many foreign wives, contrary to God's instructions for kings in Israel. These wives came from nations that worshipped false gods, and they turned Solomon's heart away from the one true God. As Solomon grew older, his foreign wives influenced him to worship their gods and participate in their pagan rituals. He built high places and altars for these gods, including Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. God was displeased with Solomon's actions and sent prophets to warn him of the consequences of his disobedience. But Solomon continued to stray, ignoring the warnings and embracing the idolatrous practices of his wives. As a result of Solomon's disobedience, God raised adversaries against him. Hadad the Edomite and Rizon son of Eliada rebelled against Solomon, causing unrest and turmoil in the kingdom. God also raised up Jeroboam, a man from the tribe of Ephraim, to oppose Solomon and eventually become king over 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. Despite these challenges, Solomon remained king over Judah and Benjamin until his death. However, his later years were marked by a decline in his once great wisdom and a turning away from God's commands. As Solomon neared the end of his life, he reflected on the vanity of his worldly pursuits. Despite all his wealth, power, and wisdom, he realized that these things were fleeting and ultimately meaningless. In the book of Ecclesiastes, attributed to Solomon, he writes, "Vanity of vanities, vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Solomon realized that true fulfillment could not be found in material possessions or earthly pleasures. Instead, he came to understand that the key to a meaningful life lay in fearing God and keeping his commandments. In Ecclesiastes, he concludes, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." Despite his failings and shortcomings, Solomon's wisdom and legacy endured. His writings, including the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, continued to inspire and instruct generations of Israelites and later Christians and Jews alike. His legacy as a wise and prosperous king left a lasting impact on Israel's history and culture. Solomon's story serves as a reminder of the importance of seeking wisdom and living a life in accordance with God's will. It teaches us that true fulfillment comes from a relationship with God and a commitment to following his commandments. In the end, Solomon's journey serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us of the fleeting nature of worldly pursuits and the importance of seeking something greater. His words of wisdom continue to resonate today, reminding us to seek first the kingdom of God and to live our lives in accordance with His will. Just like King Solomon, I will conclude by saying, fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. In the land of Canaan, Jacob lived with his 12 sons. Among them, Joseph was his favorite, gifted with dreams and a coat of many colors. Jacob's favoritism sowed seeds of jealousy among his other sons. One night, Joseph had a dream and excitedly told his brothers, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers responded angrily, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" They hated him even more because of his dream and what he had said. Undeterred, Joseph had another dream and shared it with his family, saying, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him. "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" Jacob's favoritism continued, and Joseph's brothers grew increasingly resentful. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who conspired to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him." Reuben, trying to save Joseph, said, "Let's not take his life. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." He intended to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. When the Ishmaelite traders came by, Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." So they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and he was taken to Egypt. When Joseph's brothers returned to Jacob, they deceitfully presented his colorful coat, stained with animal blood, claiming that Joseph had been devoured by a wild beast. Jacob, heartbroken and filled with sorrow, mourned deeply for his beloved son Joseph, whom he thought was no more. The loss of Joseph, his favorite son, plunged Jacob into a lasting grief, as he cherished Joseph deeply. In Egypt, he was sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. In Potiphar's house, Joseph found himself in a new world, far removed from the comfort of his father's favor. Yet, even in servitude, Joseph's integrity and God-given abilities shone brightly. Potiphar quickly recognized Joseph's exceptional qualities and appointed him as overseer of his household. Joseph proved to be a diligent and trustworthy steward, and Potiphar's house flourished under his care. However, Joseph's virtue would soon be tested. Potiphar's wife, captivated by Joseph's handsome appearance, tried to seduce him.
"Come lie with me,"
she said. Joseph, faithful to his master and to God, resisted her advances, saying, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Frustrated by Joseph's rejection, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of attempting to assault her. Potiphar, believing his wife's deceitful story, had Joseph thrown into prison, a place reserved for Pharaoh's enemies and criminals. Yet, even in prison, Joseph's character and talents did not go unnoticed. The warden soon put him in charge of all the prisoners, recognizing his ability to bring order and efficiency to the chaotic environment. It was in this dark and desolate place that Joseph's gift of interpreting dreams would emerge. Two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, were imprisoned, each having a troubling dream. Joseph, filled with compassion, asked them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The chief cupbearer recounted his dream of pressing wine into Pharaoh's cup. "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." While the chief baker described his dream of birds eating bread from a basket on his head. "There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." Joseph interpreted the dreams, foretelling that the chief cupbearer would be restored to his position in 3 days, while the chief baker would be executed. True to Joseph's interpretation, the events unfolded exactly as he had foretold. Yet, the chief cupbearer, once restored to his position, forgot about Joseph and did not advocate for his release. Joseph remained in prison for 2 full years, forgotten and alone. However, his faith in God remained steadfast, and his gift of interpreting dreams remained strong. Finally, his moment would come. Pharaoh himself had a troubling dream, one that none of his wise men could interpret. The chief cupbearer, suddenly remembering Joseph's ability, told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew in prison, who had accurately interpreted his and the chief baker's dreams. Summoned before Pharaoh, Joseph stood as a beacon of hope and wisdom. Pharaoh recounted his dreams of 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 gaunt cows, and 7 healthy ears of grain being consumed by 7 thin, scorched ears. Joseph, guided by God's wisdom, interpreted the dreams as foretelling 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine," Joseph suggested. Impressed by Joseph's insight, Pharaoh appointed him as second in command, tasking him with overseeing the preparations for the impending famine. As the famine ravaged the land of Canaan, Jacob's sons found themselves in desperate need of food. Hearing that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob sent his sons, except for Benjamin, to buy grain from the Egyptian ruler. Unknown to them, the ruler was their long-lost brother Joseph, whom they had sold into slavery years ago. Joseph, now a powerful official in Egypt, recognized his brothers when they arrived, but chose to keep his identity hidden. Joseph tested his brothers' character by accusing them of being spies. He demanded that they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to prove their innocence. Simeon was taken prisoner until they returned with Benjamin. When they returned with Benjamin, Joseph arranged a feast for them, but secretly returned the silver they had paid for the grain in their sacks. Then he instructed his steward to place his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. After they left, Joseph sent his steward to search their bags. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, they were brought back to Joseph. Judah, speaking on behalf of his brothers, pleaded with Joseph to take him as a slave instead of Benjamin, as Jacob could not bear to lose another son. Touched by his brothers' changed hearts, Joseph revealed himself to them, saying, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." Overwhelmed with emotion and guilt, Joseph's brothers were speechless. But Joseph reassured them, saying, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." Joseph then invited his family to live in Egypt, where he could provide for them during the remaining years of famine. The brothers returned to Canaan with the news, and Jacob, after some convincing, agreed to move to Egypt with his family. A joyful moment, as Jacob was finally reunited with his beloved son. As Joseph's family settled in Egypt, Joseph continued to prosper, fulfilling God's promise to him and his family. Joseph's legacy of forgiveness and reconciliation with his brothers was a powerful testament to the transformative power of God's love. He reassured his brothers, saying, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Indeed, Joseph's wisdom and foresight in storing grain during the years of plenty saved not only Egypt, but also his family and many others from starvation during the years of famine. His leadership and God-given gift of interpreting dreams were instrumental in this great act of salvation. As Joseph's family grew and prospered in Egypt, they remembered God's promise to their forefathers and the role Joseph played in fulfilling that promise. They lived to see the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as their descendants multiplied and became a great nation. Joseph's story serves as a reminder that even in the face of adversity and betrayal, God is always at work, turning evil into good and fulfilling his promises to those who trust in him. Joseph's life was a testament to the power of faith, forgiveness, and the unwavering providence of God. Once upon a time in the land of Israel, the people were oppressed by the Midianites after turning away from the Lord. The Israelites cried out to the Lord for help, and he sent them a prophet who said,
"This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me."
Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak tree which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him,
"The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor."
O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us, and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites.
Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?
O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house.
Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man.
If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you.
I will wait until you come back.
So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat, and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot. And he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. The angel of God said to him,
"Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock, and pour out the broth."
And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand, and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Now Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. So Gideon said,
Alas, O Lord God, for I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face.
Then the Lord said to him,
"Peace be with you. Do not fear. You shall not die."
So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord, and called it, "The Lord is Peace." Now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him,
"Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement. And take the second bull, and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image, which you shall cut down."
So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants, and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, there was the altar of Baal torn down, and the wooden image that was beside it was cut down, and the second bull was being offered on the altar which had been built. So they said to one another,
"Who has done this thing?"
And when they had inquired and asked, they said,
Gideon the son of Joash has done this thing.
Then the men of the city said to Joash,
Bring out your son, that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the wooden image that was beside it.
But Joash said to all who stood against him,
Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down.
Therefore, on that day, he called Gideon Jerubbaal, saying,
Let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar.
Then all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. So Gideon said to God,
If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said.
And it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece together, he wrung the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God,
Do not be angry with me, but let me speak just once more. Let me test, I pray, just once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, but on all the ground let there be dew.
And God did so that night. It was dry on the fleece only, but there was dew on all the ground. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon,
The people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, My own hand has saved me. Now therefore, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, Whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead.
And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. But the Lord said to Gideon,
The people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Then it will be, that of whom I say to you, This one shall go with you, the same shall go with you. And of whomever I say to you, This one shall not go with you, the same shall not go.
So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon,
Everyone who laps from the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise everyone who gets down on his knees to drink.
And the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. Then the Lord said to Gideon,
By the 300 men who lapped I will save you, and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place.
So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands. And he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him,
Arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp.
Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said,
I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed.
Then his companion answered and said,
This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp.
And so it was, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, that he worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said,
Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand.
Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet into every man's hand, with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them,
Look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon.
So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And every man stood in his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. After Gideon's army of 300 men surprised the Midianites with trumpets and torches, causing confusion and leading to a Midianite retreat, Gideon called for reinforcements from Ephraim and other tribes. The men of Ephraim captured 2 Midianite princes, Oreb and Zeb, and killed them. Gideon explained that he had not called them earlier because the victory was already assured by God. This explanation satisfied the men of Ephraim, and their anger toward Gideon subsided. Gideon and his army pursued the remaining enemies. Along the way, Gideon asked for food from the people of Succoth and Penuel, but they refused, fearing reprisal from the Midianites. Gideon promised to return and punish them after the victory. Gideon and his men captured the 2 Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, and brought them back to Israel. Gideon then carried out his promise, punishing the men of Succoth and Penuel for their lack of support. Afterward, Gideon was asked to rule over Israel, but he refused, saying that God alone should rule over them. Gideon asked for gold earrings from the plunder, which he used to make an ephod, a priestly garment, which became a snare to him and his family. Gideon had 70 sons who were his own offspring, for he had many wives. The land had peace for 40 years during Gideon's lifetime. From Gideon's life, we learn that God can use even the most unlikely individuals to accomplish his purposes. Gideon started as a fearful and hesitant man, but through God's guidance and empowerment, he became a mighty warrior and leader. Gideon's story reminds us that God looks beyond our weaknesses and sees our potential to be used for his kingdom. It encourages us to trust in God's strength rather than our own, and to be willing to step out in faith, even when we feel inadequate.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share.